to have their cameras on. I just want to say that.
And we're live.
Welcome all. Welcome to SIU System Conversations of Understanding. Thank you for joining us. And our topic of today is perspectives on creating an anti-racist system. My name is Cristina Castillo. I am the coordinator of Hispanic Latino Resource Center at SIU Carbondale, and I am happy to be the moderator for this conversation. Let me go ahead and introduce all the people that are in this forum. Dr. Mahoney.
Yeah, I'm Dan Mahoney, president of the SIU system, and I'm not part of the panel, but I will be wrapping it up at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Mahoney. Now our panelists that will share their expertise, experiences, and ideas for this conversation. We have Dr. Moroz.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rose Moroz, and I serve as the Assistant Dean of the Graduate School on the Carbondale campus.
Dr. Snipes.
Good afternoon. My name is JT Snipes, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education, Health, and Human Behavior, and I also serve as president of our Black Faculty and Staff Association.
Thank you, Dr. Moroz and Dr. Snipes. And now our students, Ms. Jesadia Nunnery.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesadia Nunnery. I'm a third-year student at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and I serve as co-secretary for the National Association of Colored Women's Club.
Thank you, Jesadia. And now Mr. Caleb McKinley-Porte.
Thank you. My name is Caleb McKinley-Porte. I am the Vice President of Graduate School Affairs for the Graduate and Professional Student Council, as well as the Graduate Advisor for the Black Affairs Council here at SIU Carbondale.
Thank you all. And then finally, our Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Dr. Sheila Caldwell.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Sheila Caldwell, Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the Chief Diversity Officer for the Southern Illinois University System. Before we get started, I did want to share just a few announcements. I wanted to remind everybody that we're excited that we are recording this event because this will give you an opportunity to go back and reflect and maybe take a moment to look at certain questions or things that you wanted to ponder. With that, we also were hoping that we could definitely encourage you to subscribe to our SIUS YouTube channel. This will give more opportunities for you to engage in not just this conversation, but previous conversations of understanding that we have uploaded on YouTube. So if you haven't had an opportunity to do that, please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And the last thing I wanted to say is that this conversation was deliberately curated in response to the Southern Illinois University Edwardsville campus Diversity Day tomorrow. You will find that information in our chat. So we will really encourage you to dive deeper into a lot of the issues that we're going to discuss today. Dr. Harris, as well as Ms. Lindy Wagner and their team have developed an excellent day focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this will be another way, again, to dive deeper and to continue the conversation. So you can find that information in our chat today. And again, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. So let's start. This is an extremely important topic for the SIU system, and so we're going to start first of all with all our panelists to share one or more characteristics of anti-racist system or individual. In no particular order.
Well, I guess I could start off. I think that the anti-racism has to involve active engagement. And I see that as needing to be pervasive throughout. So when whatever we do, whatever we say, we must be aware of the effects that has on other people. And we have to examine our policies and our motives as we go to make sure they're equitable.
I would like to jump in and say, as we talk about anti-racism work, I think many of us are familiar with the phrase that was first quoted by Dr. Angela Davis. It's not enough to just not be a racist, but to be an anti-racist. And I know that Dr. Ibram Kendi has popularized that phrase. And so when I think about characteristics of what it means to just say, not to say I'm not a racist, I think what he means by that, if we were to expand on that, is that someone who just says I'm not a racist, they may think, you know, if you're listening today, like what is the disposition of someone who says that? They may think, well, you know, I'm not the person who's contributing to these harms today. I'm not a racist. I don't have the burdens of the past that I have to carry. I wasn't even born. Why should I be responsible for these burdens? Why should I correct past wrongs? I'm not perpetuating harm. They may not be willing to put themselves in uncomfortable situations. They may say, I don't see color, but we all are different shades and hues. And so it's not helpful to not see color, because people who have darker hues oftentimes have very different experiences in this country. So to ignore color is not a service. It can be really a disservice. In a lot of ways, it is a disservice to people from the global majority who represent diversity. And I think that they may believe in equality, but they may not promote equity, because part of promoting equity is to acknowledge and to face past wrongs and to actively work to eradicate those inequities that have existed for so many years. So when someone says I'm not an anti-racist, that individual will just only focus on what they haven't done. They're going to think about what are the things that I need to commit to as an individual and as somebody who's employed. I mean, any of us, if you're employed in politics, or that's your goal, if you're employed in education or economics or healthcare, or even the ministry, we all have our roles to play. And an anti-racist will say, I'm going to actively do what I can in my area of dominion to make sure that people are treated with equality, respect, equity, and I'm going to keep my eyes wide open, and I'm going to look for policies, for practices, for behaviors, for attitudes that do not promote anti-racism, and I'm going to confront and disrupt that so we can ensure anti-racism and equity for all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe the mindset and the disposition of an anti-racist compared to someone who simply says, I'm not a racist. They are two totally different individuals with two different thought processes. And the goal is for us to all lean more into being an anti-racist and to be on the journey of anti-racism.
Anyone else of our panelists would like to share?
Sure. I'll build on the wonderful foundation that Dr. Caldwell has laid for us, and just say, in order for us to understand what an anti-racist system looks like, we have to be clear on what racism is. And I think Dr. Caldwell has laid out some really important ideas in thinking about racism. So when I think about this question, I go to one of my favorite books. It's a text that I use for my diversity class, Is Everyone Really Equal? And in this text by Osalim Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo, they define racism as the white racial and cultural prejudice and discrimination supported by institutional power and authority, used to the advantage of whites and the disadvantage of peoples of color. Racism encompasses economic, political, social, and institutional actions and beliefs that systematize and perpetuate an unequal distribution of privileges, resources, and power between whites and people of color. And if we're going to be an anti-racist system, well, I guess one characteristic of an anti-racist system is the willingness to name whiteness and white supremacy and the disproportionate effect it has on policies, on politics, economic, social, and institutional actions, right? That has to be clear. And my heart is heavy because in institutions of higher education, I think about the case of Jelani Day. And if you aren't familiar with Jelani Day, I would encourage you to Google it. It is unfathomable to me that this bright young college student, this Black man, was reported missing in August, and his body was found and sat unreported for over a month. So when I think about what racism, what an anti-racist system looks like, it's one that acknowledges, supports, and loves Black people. And I say Black people in particular, because I would argue that anti-Blackness is at the core of an anti-racist, acknowledging anti-Blackness is at the core of an anti-racist institution. And seeking to mitigate that is very important for me. So I think, again, a characteristic of an anti-racist system for me is one that's clear on what racism is, names whiteness, and works to love Blackness and Black folks.
Mr. Nunnery or Mr. McKinley?
I guess I'll step in. However, I must say that I'm not sure that there's much I can add that hasn't already been said by Dr. Snipes or Dr. Caldwell, except to say that anti-racism is also deeply interpersonal, you know, that on that macro level, right? And it's being willing to engage with that difficult conversation when you encounter it. That is at its core of anti-racism, is addressing it head on. And as we come up on that on the holiday season, yeah, that might be, you know, the difficult conversation at the Thanksgiving Day table. It might be a difficult conversation with a professor who spoke a little bit out of turn in a Zoom meeting or in class, whatever the case may be. It is all about addressing it head on and calling it what it is, regardless of one's intention. Because that is the problem with racism, is that it can become so ingrained in society and so ingrained into who we are that some people are doing it, not realizing that they're doing it, regardless of what their intentions may be. And while your intentions might be good, that doesn't make it any less problematic. You know, intent versus outcome. That is the core of it. You know, as I tell my students in communication studies, you know, intent versus outcome is very different. If you love to cook, your intent may be to cook dinner. The outcome is you may have caught fire to your house, right? That is the difference of intent versus outcome. So when somebody says something that is out of turn, their intention may be just to have a conversation. The outcome is that they may have said something that was deeply problematic, deeply anti-Black, as well as racist. And so when you can address that outcome as what it is head on, then that is a good start in the direction of anti-racism. And particularly that's on an interpersonal level.
And just to piggyback off what Caleb said, I know a lot of people's defense on whether they're racist or not is because it doesn't really involve them anymore because it happened so long ago. But I think a lot of people fail to realize that a lot of things that happened in the past still affect us today. So it's still very much relevant. And I love what Caleb said about intent, and whether you said it with intent or regardless, what you said really hurt. And I think a lot of the things that is a cause of this, like many microaggressions and just a lot of racist things that are being done and said in higher education and just in society, period, is we still haven't really eradicated a lot of the ignorance that is in our education system. So I just think it really starts there, where we just really acknowledge what racism is, just like what Mr. Snipes said, and just let go of the idea of, because it happened in the past, it's still not relevant today.
Thank you, Ms. Nunnery, and absolutely, I would agree as well with the statements, right? The intention, it's not knowing or acknowledging racism, it's a hindrance for us to be anti-racist. And I think that our intention is as well, it has to be an active and consistent process to change individuals and to change the society and dismantle those policies that are fostering inequalities. So thank you so much for the input to all our panelists. Now let's go to the next question. And just if everybody wants to, is interested, is everyone really equal, is the book that Mr. Snipes referenced. So just check it out. Do you believe it is possible to build an anti-racist system given the historical and present day realities of racism in America? This question is for Dr. Snipes and Dr. Morales.
So I'll kick it off and say, this is a difficult question for me because I want to be optimistic. And anyone I talk to about our institutions, specifically here at SIU within the system, I will always say that there is the possibility. I believe we have the possibility to become the preeminent anti-racist institution. Now, I start there because I do have doubts, because undoing this system, this racist system within higher education is extremely difficult. I teach a class on the foundations of higher education, and one of the books that I have my students read is Ebony and Ivy. And in Ebony and Ivy, Craig Wilder makes the point that racism vis-a-vis slavery is not aberrant to institutions. It was literally the foundation of higher education in the United States. The way that Harvard, Princeton, and Yale were able to come to prominence is because they convinced a planter class of slavers to come to their institutions, to sit on their board, and to finance the institutions in and of themselves. So when we think about the pinnacle of higher education in the United States, it's mired in a system of slavery and white supremacy and the eradication of indigenous folks. So that history didn't immediately disappear when the Moral Act of 1890 was founded and historically Black colleges and universities sprang up. That history didn't dissipate in 1964 with the signing of the Civil Rights Act. So there is still a lot of work to do for institutions to reimagine an institution not encumbered by the foundations of slavery and inequity. So it is possible, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take some disrupting of particular norms. Because I grew up in the 1980s where we assumed that everyone was equal. And what I have had to learn, and what I hope others will learn, is that our society is not equal, that there is injustices, and those injustices exist within our institution. So I do believe it's possible, but I think we have to be clear about where the institution stands and what are the problems. And as I mentioned earlier, we have to be able to name race. We have to be able to name white supremacy. We can't pretend that this notion of colorblindness will lead us to equality. No problem that has ever been solved, well, we have to face problems before they can be solved.
Thank you, Dr. Snipes.
I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Snipes of the difficulty of the foundation that we're facing. But I have to believe that it is possible for us to become an anti-racist world, an anti-racist system, because I believe we have no choice. I think it's the only way we're going to be able to move forward in a healthy way. I have to bring in our environment too. We have to be loving on that level and take care of our land. And I think caring for our land and caring for each other go hand in hand. And they require us to assume the best in people and to look further into their situations and try to figure out what the source of problems are instead of looking at a situation and attributing whatever problems to the color of one's skin. Because we all have these lives that we're trying to lead, and we have these families we're trying to grow and support, and we want to put food on the table and be warm in the winter, and we have these common needs. And I think that we have to wake up every morning and put on our big girl clothes and go out in the world, and everyone we encounter, we have to look at with compassion, and we have to examine everything that comes out of our mouths and our actions to make sure that we are doing the best we can to build this more equitable world. So I do believe, and I believe that as we all work more and more toward this, going on this journey of becoming more anti-racist, that we invite and we influence people to join us on this journey. And I think that we need a critical mass. The more people we get who are committed, the easier it becomes. Not to say it will ever be easy, but it does lighten the load. When you have a huge load, it lightens the load when there are many, many people sharing it with you.
And if I may, I think that's a really important point. I am here at SIUE because I believe we're at an inflection point. I genuinely believe this institution can become the premier anti-racist institution because our leadership is here in this conversation right now. My concern is that we won't have folks at the grassroots level organizing and supporting our institution. We have too many folks. I'm concerned that we may have too many folks that are only concerned with not being being perceived as not racist, as opposed to actively anti-racist. And I think we have a collective responsibility to engage in this work. And not to say that a small but mighty few can't make a difference, because we know historically in the civil rights movement that it was the minority of folks that engaged in direct action that led to transformation. But my hope is that the majority will step up and see this not as the responsibility of minoritized persons of color, but to see this as our collective responsibility to be an anti-racist institution.
Thank you.
I share that hope.
Yes, we all of us here, and hopefully many more, all the people that are tuning in, share this hope, right? To really do become an anti-racist system and an anti-racist communities and world. Thank you so much for the insightful conversation. Now, let's see, this question is going to be for our students. What are the specific policies, practices, and structures that need to be put in place on SIU campuses to become an anti-racist system?
I guess I'll add two things. One, I brought up earlier, just being informed of Black history, because I really feel like Black history is seen as optional in like a lot of schools. I do know if it wasn't for one of my mentors, Dr. Patterson and Dr. Ramsey, I wouldn't have taken this course called Fame and Game, and it really deals with a lot of Black history and Black excellence. And this kind of leads me to my second suggestion. Because I was in that class, I felt like I was a part of a community, and it felt like I felt comfortable enough to share my own personal experiences with just being on campus and just personal things like that, of that matter. Just think that it'll be really beneficial for campuses to just really branch out and make it a requirement, not a requirement, but just open the idea of having more Black classes and just opening the idea of having students come to these freshman classes and share their experiences and just be a mentor to the younger freshmen, because it really starts with the younger generation as well if we want to get anywhere. So those are my two suggestions, just more Black curriculum and mentorship.
I completely agree, especially, having taken courses in Africana Studies as a graduate student, as a PhD student, it completely reshaped my dissertation research. I went from thinking, I'm just going to write on this one thing, to completely broadening the areas that I'm looking into, such as Black performance aesthetics and Afrofuturism, and how they're all related and how that can all relate to discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism. And what does it mean for a Black body to be taking up particular spaces in places where it typically is not welcome, which is also education, right? And especially historically speaking, I'm sitting at an institution that just hired their first Black chancellor back in 2020, after 150 years of being open. That's a very difficult reality to face, given the areas of research that I'm diving into for my PhD, as you can imagine. But that is also to say that for students to really engage with this work, a lot of the times it does start with conversations, and it starts with courses. It starts with knowing or looking for which kind of courses you can take. I had mentioned in our preparation meeting how I had the privilege of taking a course on a hot button issue nowadays, critical race theory. And the course was actually called Critical Race Theory and Communication. And interesting note, this was actually a hybrid course, and I don't mean hybrid in the sense of it was partially online and partially in person. That didn't come until COVID. It was hybrid as in there were graduate students and undergraduate students present. It was the 400 level. So really, whether you were earning a PhD law degree, master's, or if you were an undergrad, you had access to this course. And it really laid the foundational work for how laws were written and how the racial caste system specific to the United States was truly established, and how the color difference and colorism is established, and then really starting to ask those questions of what does this all mean? What is it that created those conditions? And therefore, what is it that created the conditions for race and the social construction of race to be established, and then to start developing ways of working against it. And so having the privilege to take that course gave me the tools that I needed, tools that quite frankly didn't know I needed, to understand what it means to dismantle it and what it means to actually be critical, because being critical is not a bad thing. Being critical allows you to ask those meaningful questions, particularly around race and racism and anti-Blackness. But then also the other side of that is offering solutions. That's the other side of being critical, is that the questions allow you to see where the gaps are. Then that gives you an invitation to create solutions. And so when you are getting access to those courses, if they're being offered, mind you, if they're being offered, when you get access to those courses, then that gives you access to the tools that you need in order to move forward and continue to be anti-racist. And so that also means talking to your advisor, talking to your professors, taking courses in other majors. I'm communication studies. I took courses in Africana studies. And the critical race theory course that I got to take was cross-appointed with 3 other departments. And so being able and willing to have access to that and being willing to engage with these courses and talking to the right people, that is what's going to give you the tools that you need to move forward.
Thank you, Caleb. I think you bring an excellent point as far as the diversifying the curriculum and adding more classes and courses that represent the population, right? And I also would chime in with this one. I think that it's extremely important, the institutional culture of our right, so that we can have those policies. Like right now, we're having these conversations that are very difficult and challenging, but we also have to have that student enrollment, right? And that sense of pursuing the students that we want to have in our university to really become a more diverse and anti-racist and basically giving those access and opportunities to a diverse student population. And I agree with you in everything, as well as with Ms. Nanuri, in the regard that for a lot of our programming, for me, in the case of Hispanic Latino events, usually the people that attend are Hispanic Latino events, but it is for everybody, right? And so many times is for us to be out there to educate and to share our culture, but it ends up that only the people that relate to it are the ones that attend. And so we have to be a little bit more mindful in taking that step into venturing into getting to know others in order to be knowledgeable and also get these assumptions away from what we think it is a specific culture or ethnic group. Thank you so much. Our following question, before I mute myself, please share concrete actions, steps faculty and students can take to advance and accelerate anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. This is for Dr. Caldwell and everyone in the panel.
Thank you. What I would like to do, I'm definitely going to address that, but one of the things that I did want to just mention that is a popular phrase that we use in the academy is called decolonizing the curriculum. And I wanted to go back to that because I think one of the features of an anti-racist organization is to pay careful attention to their curriculum. And I'm actually just going to quickly share an excerpt of a 5-page letter. I'm not going to share 5 pages, from a student, a graduate student that I received yesterday. And it goes back to the comments that Mr. McKinley-Porte and Ms. Nunnery mentioned. She said, being a Black academic is paying to be subjected to constant microaggressions and institutionalized racism. She says, no one understands how harmful it is to tell Black scholars that white history is their history. She talks about how she knew a little bit about Black history, but did not know that Black women have their own history, and their role in history is largely obscured in both women's studies and Black history. And she talked about basically having to pay to really do her own research. And she says, how is that fair? What did my tuition get me? But she talked about how at the same time, these opportunities have been presented for her to be able to understand her history more thoroughly. And what she would like to invite an academy is more of her professors to be the ones actually doing that work. And so I thought it was important to share that. One, I told her that I would because it was anonymous, and I felt the same way when I saw the hand clap. But I just wanted to share that because oftentimes as we talk about this information, it's like, oh, this happened in the past, but we're getting letters today, and there are people who have experiences today where they're still experiencing racism at the hands of institutions, specifically in higher ed. So I wanted to say all of these conversations we're having is not about the past. They're very present day. They're current realities that need to be tackled specifically by SIU and by other institutions that claim to be anti-racist. So under that vein, when we talk about what does it mean to be an anti-racist, I thought it would be beneficial to share about how we can all participate in anti-racism. And in the basically the theories and strategies that Ibram Kendi would employ, he actually gives about 6 steps that each individual can commit to on their journey to anti-racism. First, he talked about understand the definition of a racist, which he defines as anybody who executes racist ideas or policies. If you have a racist thought, a racist idea, a racist policy, that is the definition. He says, stop saying I'm not a racist and work towards becoming an anti-racist. And we shared about that earlier, the difference between someone who simply says they're not a racist and what does it mean to commit to the work of being anti-racist and disrupting racist policies. identify racial disparities. I'm gonna give you a quick example. Again, this is not in the past. Tennessee, the Chronicle of Education, they came out with an article just last week to show that they had underpaid HBCU $550 million over the past 50 years. $550 billion is how much they were underfunded. The state of Tennessee admitted to that they underfunded the HBCU by that significant amount of money over the past 50 years. At the same time, the predominantly white institution, they actually overpaid them. They gave them more than that equal share of funding. So this all just came out last week. So when we talk about racial disparities, once again, they still exist, and it is because of race. Number 4, confront the racist ideas you've held or continue to hold. And that is for people from all different ethnic groups. Kendi recognizes that it's not just people from white populations who can hold racist ideas, that we all have to examine how systemic racism in a lot of ways has brainwashed all of us, you know, and has caused us all to maybe perpetuate certain harms in different ways. And so it's up to us to be self-reflective. 50, understand how your racism needs to be intersectional, which can again include the LGBTQIA community, women of color, people with disabilities. The letter I just sent was from somebody who identifies as African-American as well as a woman. So her identity is intersectional. And last but not least, again, as we commit to anti-racism, that means that we're actively doing something. So he says that anti-racist will champion anti-racist ideas and policies. So we will be at the forefront, you know, and be the cheerleaders to, you know, to say aloud that we're anti-racist and that we're proud. And so that's basically what those steps that Kendi tells that we can all employ to be anti-racist.
So I'll jump in with the concrete steps for faculty. Well, this is actually for anyone within our community, particularly at SIUE. In the summer of 2020, we organized an anti-racism task force. And this task force created a list of over 70 recommendations for the campus. And one practical step that you can do as a member of this community is to visit the website. I'll drop that in the chat. And we actually have a progress dashboard. And what I would encourage you to do is to familiarize yourself with the over 70 recommendations and find one that relates to you or one that you're interested in and begin advocating for it. It is easy for these ideas to gain momentum and then sort of peter out. And I would love it if we can begin to continue to provide support and accountability to our institution for living up to its espoused anti-racist values. So a really practical step, go to the website, I'm gonna drop it in the chat, find 1 or 2 recommendations that you can get behind and be a point of accountability for our institution to get these things done.
I'll jump in here. Something Dr. Snipes just mentioned about continuing and not letting this peter out. And also Ms. Nunnery had mentioned, I think before, having real conversations with people. And I think my idea would be we have we have a really well put together discrimination and harassment training that we all look at on the computer individually. And we do get to watch videos and hear from people from different races, from different walks of life, and the reactions they have and the life experiences they have. But I think it would be much more powerful if we could actually meet in person in small groups and have more conversations where we really share with each other, where we create safe space to go through the issues that come up, the thoughts and the feelings that come up, and actually learn more also about history and about the racism as it shows itself in our university especially. And I would see this as a continuation of that discrimination training. And I would see these groups examining policies that occur on the campus and also problem solving when issues come up. People from different walks of life talking together and thinking of solutions on sort of the smaller level instead of tackling maybe the issues for the whole system or the whole university. It could be a group of 20 who tackle a certain issue of a doctoral student who is experiencing discrimination as she works through her research study, etc. So that would be my idea, to bring us together face to face. And I would say continuing is the key, so that we could establish this to be, say, monthly meetings, and people would actually get to know each other and be able to learn to trust that the other people in their group were being honest with them and all working towards the same goal.
I guess just to piggyback off of the statement that was just said, I feel like change can't happen and we can't fully build an anti-racist environment if people report racist acts that are done to them or racist statements that are said to them, and it gets ignored or it gets downplayed. So I really think that we just need to focus more on just holding people accountable for that, and just listening to victims, listening to what they have to say. And like I said, just having those uncomfortable conversations and really just mediating those conversations to come with a solution, because it happens often, and a lot of people really feel like they have no one to turn to because they feel like people won't care or it's just not their problem. So they just really, I don't know, they just let it build up and it just continues to happen, and people just continue to not be held accountable.
I think Ms. Nunnery really hit the nail on the head, is being willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. And Dr. Moreau's, a lot of what you described reminds me of the dialogue training that I had through Sustained Dialogue a few years ago by the now Assistant Vice Chancellor of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Lindy Wagner. Being willing to engage, but also knowing how, right? And that training really facilitated that when you encounter these kinds of conversations, rather than shutting down and disengaging or saying, well, I don't agree, because when you hear those counterpoints, the initial response is to just cut people off at the knees, right? I used to do that, and especially on social media. But what the dialogue training necessitated was that rather than stopping them, you ask them to continue and say, you know what, tell me more. Have them keep going, and then say, well, what is it that brought you to this? What is it that made you feel this way? And really engage and ask them about that experience. Because the further you dig, the more you get to a deeper understanding, and to where even they can see where it comes from. And that's where you interact with the counter narrative, with the counterpoint, and saying, well, you seem to think this about Black people, you seem to think this about Latinx people, you seem to have these deeply held firm beliefs, but the narrative, the overall narrative that counteracts yours explains these details and these experiences, and allow me to articulate why that's opposite or negates your perspective. As painful as that might be, it's like you still have that opportunity to tell them why their ideas of a particular race is problematic, but you've done it in a way that has gotten them to engage rather than just sort of cutting them off. Because oftentimes, as Dr. Caldwell put it earlier, we're all exposed to some form of racism, and then we hold on to those beliefs, such as the bifurcating of a good Black person versus the bad Black person, or you're one of the good ones, as I was so frequently heard as a college student and as a high school student even. how problematic that is, and then understanding that that distinction was created to divide and conquer. Because if we're having those fights within ourselves, based on behaviors or our complexion, then the racists get to sit back and watch, right? And then we're all a bad one, right? So being willing to engage with those conversations to get to a deeper understanding as to why people think that the way they think and the way that they feel, that gives us another way in to dismantle those firmly held racist beliefs. It's just, you got to be willing to take that first step.
Thank you all. And I would chime in as well in the sense that sometimes it takes a change of heart. And that's when I think about Dr. Snipes being hopeful. We want to have those deep conversations and ultimately a change of heart and be compassionate and being equitable to become an anti-racist, anti-racist. So we're all in the mix, but it's amazing that that we all have ideas and the strategies, and yet we find ourselves in difficult times. Our next question is for Dr. Caldwell, and I am in support of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but my colleagues are not. How will SIU enforce new policies that support anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? Is it through contract negotiation with the unions?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. That was one of the questions from our audience members, just that them feeling like they were supporting direction that the colleges and the system is moving towards, but they don't sense that their colleagues, and how will we deal with that? And one of the things that we're doing as we talk about policies is that we are looking at our policies. We're doing audits specifically on policies as it relates to retention, promotion, and tenure for faculty, staff, and students. Earlier this week, the leadership from the system office, we were with the Illinois Board of Higher Ed, and we were specifically recommending strategies to talk specifically about equity as it relates primarily to students of color, specifically African American and Latinx. Looking at areas again of retention, not just retention, how students advance, how long does it take them to get from their freshman to sophomore year, money that we needed to expand different programming that was going to help advance students of color through the SIU campuses. We are working with an organization called NASH, the National Association for Agency Heads, and that's with 20 other institutions across the nation. And our whole goal is to focus specifically on policy. During my tenure here, we have worked to collect what we call ADEI initiatives, benchmark initiatives. So we're collecting data on climate. We are actually going to be instituting a climate survey for all faculty, staff, and students across all the campuses in February of 2020. So I wanted to bring that to your attention so you could be ready to participate in that. I mentioned all of those efforts to say that as we talk about enforcing policy, we need consistent data to do that. So a lot of the efforts have been to collect data to examine where we are right now and where we want to go, and that we could communicate and be transparent, because one of the things that we need to know is that as we've asked certain questions, it's like, well, all of this information isn't readily available to all stakeholders. So I believe that anti-racism thrives in transparency. So when you can't get certain information, or when things are done covertly or in the dark, to me, that's one way that we know that maybe this is a racist policy. If you can't tell everybody, if you can't shout it from the rooftops, then we really have to pay attention to that. So we want to definitely make sure that as we collect data, that it's not a secret, that we're sharing it appropriately with all the different stakeholders, so each area can know this is where we are and this is how we need to advance. We're going to continue. I like the specific word that Ms. Nunnery said about holding people accountable. We are being very strategic and deliberate. When you think about, I have worked in higher ed for over 20 years, and I would like to compliment the discrimination and harassment training. It is very thorough. I know that many of us is like, oh, wow, this takes a while, but it is very thorough training. And within that training, they're showing videos, they're giving definitions, because we are saying this is what we value. And for individuals who, as the person who submitted the question, but their colleagues are not, at some point you have to examine why you are not. Do you not believe in anti-racism? Do you not believe in equity for all? Do you only want to see certain people advance through the system? Because that's what we are actually talking about. We want every single faculty, staff, student, alumni who enter our doors to be able to thrive and flourish. And I don't cognitively understand why everybody would not want that. So at some point, as we continue to espouse these values that we declare, we are going to hold people accountable. And I think it'll be clear who's on that side, and I would say who's not on that side. And our policies are going to allow us to get more people in power and positions of influence who are aligned with anti-racism. So we are going to hold people accountable, but I think it's very important to do what we are doing right now, is to educate and give people opportunity to reflect, think, and change. But if you are unwilling and unable to do so, I do think that we are going to, again, fill the halls with people who are on the same page as our organizations do. They want people to be committed to their mission statement, to their vision statement, to their strategic plan. And our strategic plan, goal number 2, specifically says anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So again, we are unified in that goal, and we want everyone to be on the same page.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. There's a question here that might go with on the chat. What are your thoughts on mandatory diversity and inclusion training for faculty, students, and staff?
Well, thank you for that question, because one of the things that we have agreed on and that we will move forward with, Dr. Mahoney, along with the chancellors, Chancellor Lane and Chancellor Pembroke, we've had the discussion, and we have agreed that next year, during this exact same time frame, the month of October, so from October 1st to October 31st, in addition to discrimination and harassment training, all employees will now take anti-racism/bias training. So that's what we will be doing next year. So that is something that is in the works right now. We've already consulted someone who can help us develop an instrument for that, and that's in place to go. So I know that a lot of people, and I appreciate the question, it was something that we implemented at Wheaton College. We did this type of training in December, and when I was the Chief Intercultural Engagement Officer, we started in December, every employee taking racism and bias training. And so this is something that I would say that's in demand, and I just want to thank everyone who has asked for this to be a part of the training, and just want you to know that we will be moving forward in October of 22 with mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all faculty, staff, and students.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. Also, there's another question on the chat that I would like to direct to Ms. Nunnery. And it says here, I think a lot of white students think of African-American centered classes aren't for them. How can we change that perception? Maybe academic advisors can encourage students to take them?
I'm so sorry. May you repeat the question, please?
Yes, the question says, I think a lot of white students think of African-American centered classes aren't for them. How can we change that perception? Maybe academic advisors can encourage them to take those courses?
Oh, okay. I think a good idea would be, I know it's required for you to take English, like intro to English, and then like 102, maybe in replace of English 101, just give them the opportunity or just the chance to branch out and take like a Black literature course. I think that can be a good starting point, because that's what I did my freshman year. I took a Black literature course, and then I took English 102. I think English 101 is still required, but I still got a lot out of a Black literature course. I think there could be a lot more courses that can just relate to other people, regardless if you're Black or white, because there's more to Black history than just slavery. So I think it's just a matter of just finding more Black curriculum courses that can would just be interesting for everyone of just all races. But I think the main one for me would be just giving them more options. Like instead of, in replace of this class, maybe take like a Black class or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Caleb, would you have anything to say or add to that?
again, Ms. Nunnery really knocked it out of the park again, because it's making sure that that class is offered, right? It's making sure that that curriculum is being offered. And I'm very happy to say that we do offer a lot of courses in Africana Studies, and those that aren't directly housed in Africana Studies are also like cross-appointed. So it might be something taught in the music department that's cross-appointed with Africana Studies, or taught in history and it's cross-appointed. I had the privilege of taking a Blaxploitation course back in 2018, and it was cross-appointed with Africana Studies, even though it was in the Department of Mass Communication, Media Arts. And so it's actually knowing if those courses are being offered. And I as the person who asked the question articulated, I do agree that onus actually is, particularly speaking as a former undergrad, that onus is on the advisor, right? And while students do have access to the course catalog, the advisors really get to advise the student on which courses are available and which ones that they can take in place of another, or should take for the completion of their degree to go on and get a job, or to go on to graduate school, right? And so I do think that, number one, making sure that the courses are available, and two, making sure that the advisors know that the courses are available, and then to offer that breadth of knowledge to as many students as possible as a viable option. Because I agree with Ms. Nunnery that the courses that do center Black narratives and Black experiences and Black literature and Black cultural aesthetics, those are not just for Black students. It does give us greater insight into who we are and how we are named and how we carry ourselves in the world. But it'll also offer some valuable insight for people who are outside of that racial demographic, outside of that group. Because if you're outside looking in, taking that course is going to give you an in into understanding that rich cultural heritage and that rich understanding as to who we are, why we do the things we do, and why we
Absolutely.
navigate the world that we are all trying to navigate as best as we can.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the insightful responses. And so let's continue with our questions here. We took care of the chat, few questions. Now let's move forward. This question is for Dr. Snipes and Dr. Caldwell. Will such terms or concepts like freedom of speech and academic freedom hinder SIU ADEI efforts?
So I know you want to move on, but I just really want to add quickly, there's a part of that question that I felt like we may have left hanging, and it's the space of these courses not being for them, white students perceiving these courses as, well, that's the thing for Black folks to do. And I just want to reiterate that Black history is American history. So when we think, I think that's the ethos that we need to begin to facilitate within our campus, that Black history at SIUE is SIUE history. So as much as possible, as we continue to move toward becoming an anti-racist campus, there needs to be symbols and stories that integrate Black history into the larger institutional history. So it's not only taking classes about it, but it's having a culture in campus that reflects that this is our history, that we don't only see white men and white women represented as our history, but we see all peoples of color and Indigenous folks and Black folks' histories represented in how we talk about our institutions. So I apologize to you as a moderator, but I felt like it's important for me to come back to that for a second.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for that. So now with the question, and I appreciate your input on that. I agree too. Will such terms or concepts like freedom of speech and academic freedom hinder SIU ADEI efforts?
I think it is possible that freedom of speech and academic freedom historically have already hindered processes for the inclusion of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion work. That's a mouthful. So historically, freedom of speech and academic freedom have served as barriers to inclusion. And I think recognizing that history, talking about that history is important. But if we can pick up a framework of inclusive excellence, and on our campus, our brilliant leader and vice president for diversity, equity, inclusion, Dr. Jessica Harris, has been pushing for us to adopt an equity mindset. So when we think about the freedom of speech historically, the law, if you take a perspective of CRT, and my brother Caleb can help keep me on point when we talk about this, but CRT talks about how the law is not neutral and historically has been in place to serve the interest of white folks, land-owning white folks, if we go back to the foundation of our Constitution, right? That this progressive history of increasing rights and access can be troubled if we take a critical lens to the law. So when we think practically about the freedom of speech, what goes unsaid is that the freedom of speech is to protect the speech of those in power, right? Our law has not grappled from a diverse lens. I had a conversation last summer with LaWanda Ward. She is a scholar at Penn State who studies both race, law, and higher education. And one of the things that she shared with me in our interview is that the law, in her opinion, as a critical race scholar, again, upholds white supremacy and is ultimately blind to Black pain. There is a really great documentary on HBO right now called The People versus the Klan. And in that documentary, it talks about the history in Southern states, that it wasn't until the 1980s that Emmett Till's killers were brought to some form of justice, some nearly 30 years after the incident, 40 years after the incident. And we know about justice delayed being justice denied. So I apologize for the history, but I think it's important to understand the context. So these tools historically have been used to block rights and to limit the rights of the minoritized. If we as an institution can pick up an equity mindset and examine the freedom of speech and examine academic freedom through a lens of racial justice and equity, we come to different outcomes and different conclusions. And they no longer become barriers, but become stalwarts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think shifting our focus and to me, academic freedom and freedom of speech are amoral tools. It's how we use them that matters.
And I agree with Dr. Snipes and pretty much everything he said. It is how we use it that matters, because unfortunately we are going to continue to have people who spew racist ideas and who counteract or who have a counter narrative to the things we want to say. And I think about critical race theory. I think that's one of the most powerful and attractive parts of critical race theory, is that just the assertion that we would own our own stories, that we would be the ones augmenting our lived experiences, and that we will be offering a counter narrative to racism. I mean, that is a big and significant part about critical race theory. So I said that to say, what does it look like if someone come and they want to practice freedom of speech and it's going against anti-racism, and for the people who they're going against racism, for the people who are truly anti-racist to actually have even a louder voice, because it's not just about, again, what we are omitting, it's what we're committing to. And, one of the examples that I thought was quite comical that I read about that recently was in Germany. Every year they have people who will march who are Holocaust deniers. And so one of the things they did, and I would use the term to psychologically outrank those individuals, is that they said, you know what, we're going to pay people, the longer you walk to deny the Holocaust, the more money that we're going to raise. And they would use that money to actually teach about the Holocaust. You know, so I would give an example. So it's like you continue to walk and deny the Holocaust, and we're going to raise all of this money, and then we're going to educate people about really what happened during the Holocaust. So I said that to say that is an example of using a racist platform and actually doing greater work in anti-racism. And I think that we talk about being strategic and creative and innovative, and those are some of the things that I think we will see more of as we are on our journey to anti-racism. Again, it's not just about saying you can't say this, you can't stop this, but I do think it is important as we talk about our policy systems and structures, if we have people who are in positions of power and leadership, there is greater accountability for those roles than there are maybe with students. So there are some things that, again, as we look at our training, that we should not obviously be the perpetuators of harm if we are obviously being paid and employed by the college. So I do want to make that distinction that might be different for students who are exercising their freedom of speech. But I do want to say that part of us is going against and pushing back towards that narrative, that we get to choose how we want to engage. And I think oftentimes it's not always from a place of just being debilitated by the words. What does it look like for us to own our power and agency and to speak our truth? We're not defined by other people's truths. It's about who we say we are, not about who others say we are. And I just encourage us to continue to own that thought and that perspective, and to, again, shout it from the rooftops that we're not going to allow that type of narrative to be the narrative that stands, because it's stood for far too long in our history in this society.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Snipes. And I agree as well. Behind academic freedom and freedom of speech, we hide and can do a lot of damage. Thank you. We have the following questions. What are some realistic strategies to get the faculty of our campuses to undergo anti-racism training? And can such training be part of our graduate students' education? We cannot teach what we have never learned. This is for all of you.
Well, I am going to jump in and just say, in addition to the training that I mentioned earlier, for all of our faculty, staff, and students, I'm working with the diversity leaders across the campus, Drs. Frazier, Harris, Dr. Elamine, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Butler, and we have discussed, and we actually have a proposal that's already been developed for anti-racist diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership certificate. So that is something, again, that we plan to implement fall of 2022. And I would encourage all students to participate in that, because it's something that Caleb said earlier, Mr. McKinley, that all employers are now looking for people who are culturally competent, who has a global awareness, who can be inclusive. And so, again, as we talk about going into the workforce and just working across the country for the greater good, those cultural competency skills, that level of awareness, the ability to engage with diverse others is becoming more significant and meaningful, especially as we have changes. If you look at the census data, the demographics have changed significantly. And so it's not okay to just for us to go into our own bubble and just to only learn about people who are like us. And the reason why I want to mention that, I want to share one quick study that the Pew Research Center studies have shown. And I'm going to give some numbers. They actually have been able to prove that when you look among white individuals, that 90%, 92% of their social network are with all other white individuals. When they look at African Americans, it's about 68%, meaning that 68% of African Americans only engage with African Americans. And then the Hispanic Latinx population was the most diverse at about 42%. So they were likely to work across different races. But again, I would say mainly whites, and then African Americans, like more than 50% of their social network are with people who look exclusively like them. And so again, as we engage with diverse people, it is important for us to learn more about other people. And this leadership certificate is going to do exactly that. So I just want to say, be aware that that's something that will be implemented, that the training will be mandatory for all faculty, staff, and students, the anti-racism and bias training, but the leadership certificate will be highly encouraged, and it will be a co-curricular certificate that you will graduate with in addition to your bachelor's degree or to your graduate degree. So I would encourage as many students as possible to reach out to their offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion and learn more about that, and to participate any assessments, any events that will allow you to earn that certificate.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. We have the following question, which is, this is the one for all the panelists. Do we have safe places where students and staff especially can deal with what they experience as racism encounters? And how do we educate the most vulnerable and prove to them their safety in such situations is a priority?
So I can start. As president of the Black Faculty and Staff Association, my hope is that that organizational structure is a space that values and supports and loves Black life on campus. And if there isn't any other space on campus where you can go and be heard and felt loved and supported, BFSA is a space on our campus for that purpose. And my hope is that we develop it's not only a safe space, but it's a brave space in which we encourage and challenge each other to push back against inequities within the system. One of the things that we are trying to do in the Black State of the Union is to have an open dialogue about where are safe spaces on our campus and where are unsafe spaces on our campus. Where's the cutting edge for our work around racial equity and justice? So for me, it's important that we not only have a space where people can feel loved, heard, valued, and supported, but also prepared to engage with spaces within the institution that are still progressing toward envisioning or embracing an anti-racist institution.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can chime in. Here at SIU, particularly for students, there is the Black Student Resource Center, which is under the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Dr. Paul Frazier. It's with his office, and for those students who may not be familiar, if you're in Carbondale and you're watching, it's the first floor of the Student Services Building. That's where it's located. Then for undergraduates, there is also the Black Affairs Council, which is a undergraduate-run student organization that actually oversees other Black-run student organizations, or RSOs, registered student organizations. And they are also the ones who facilitate the Black graduation each year with the shawls and that the kente cloth shawls that a lot of Black students in particular wear at their graduations. They have access to that and additional resources here on campus, and it is a great safe space because they have a list of resources. I'm the graduate advisor for this organization, so frequently if they need some additional advice, some additional support, they get a hold of me or their faculty advisor, the great Dr. Father Joseph A. Brown is our faculty advisor, and he is a big voice in the community, as well as a passionate activist and artist. And so they have all sorts of resources, whether it's if you just need some additional support, someplace just to hang out where you can meet and interact with other Black students, or if you need to resources, if you need to file a grievance, they can connect you to those kinds of resources in the event that you encounter some bias in your academics. And that's what we have here too. We also have similar resources for LGBTQ students, such as the Saluki Rainbow Network and the LGBTQ Resource Center, which I understand has a vacancy right now. It doesn't have a coordinator, but there are still people there in that office who can direct you to those additional resources. And in the larger community, there is the Rainbow Cafe, which helps LGBTQ youth in the Southern Illinois area. And I'm originally from Southern Illinois, and I can tell you Rainbow Cafe was around when I was in high school, and I graduated in 01. That hurts to say that out loud, but it's been around for a long time doing wonderful, wonderful work for this area. And so those are just a few of the resources that we have here on campus, as well as in the larger community.
Here, I'm also going to chime in on this one. And Caleb, thanks for the Black Resource Center, which is housing the Student Multicultural Resource Center, which is a unit under the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And this is, as Dr. Snipes mentioned, this is also a safe and brave space. The Student Multicultural Resource Center, we pride on having the most welcoming space in Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. All our students are welcome. All our coordinators can just basically serve absolutely all our students and everybody that comes into this space. So it is really the Student Multicultural Resource Center, a safe space for everybody, and a brave space. We advocate for the students. We understand the issues that our students are facing, and we really thrive on helping them and serving them for to fulfill what they set out to do here at SIU in Carbondale. So it is one of the especially safe spaces in brave, because we do have to really be brave as well and tag along their journey to make their college experience better here at SIU, and especially safe. So everybody here's LGBTQ Resource Center, Hispanic Latino Resource Center, Women's Resource Center, and the Black Resource Center. All the coordinators are amazing, not to flatter myself, but my colleagues are just amazing and ready to help and serve our students. But
don't
we
be
also
modest.
have,
you are amazing.
thank you, Caleb. But we also have, for Hispanic Latinx students, we have the Hispanic Student Council, and we have the Latino Cultural Association, which are spaces for our Hispanic students to thrive, to learn leadership positions, to become a community, have a sense of belonging, as well as we have the fraternities and sororities that are Hispanic. So we do have several spaces that are safe for our students, and for our Hispanic students that I can speak on behalf of. So, but all the other organizations and the ones that you mentioned as well, Caleb, this is a space that I'm happy we are under the unit of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it really does represent and conveys that mission statement of access and opportunity on helping our students thrive and really changing lives. So it's a really great space to work in.
And I feel remiss if I didn't give a shout out to some other spaces on campus. I only talked about my organization. I do want to mention the hub that is led by the brilliant soon-to-be Dr. Lindy Wagner, along with Tarsha Moore, who is also soon-to-be Dr. Tarsha Moore. Is a great and developing space for our students and faculty and staff. SOAR is an institution at SIUE led by Dr. P and Dr. Ramsey. That is a space that I heard about before I even got to campus, that has decades of providing support and challenging growth from both our students and staff and faculty. And then Access is a newer organization on the block, but is doing tremendous work supporting students with disabilities and students within our program, the CSPA program specifically. Professor Dorsey is a leader, an inspirational leader on our campus, and someone that is committed to justice and equity in everyday work. So that new division within DEI, led by Vice Chancellor Harris, is doing some amazing work in helping create cultures of support and love on our campus.
Thank you, Dr. Snipes. Ms. Nunnery or Dr. Moros, do you have any special safe spaces that you can share with all of us?
I was actually going to mention SOAR, but Dr. Snipes kind of covered that for me because I was in the SOAR program as well. And me and a lot of my friends utilize that area a lot. So I was going to mention that, but he kind of covered that for me.
And I was going to mention how wonderful Christina Castillo is with supporting students in that resource center. But also to say that the graduate school on the Carbondale campus, we accept any student who comes here and who has a situation, and we put our heads together to advocate for that student and to coordinate services if needed. And we just really have a commitment to helping students to solve problems, to get the resources they need, to get the encouragement they need so they can be successful. And I would also put a plug in for Saluki Cares. Saluki Cares is a resource on the Carbondale campus where you can, anyone can put in a referral to describe a student, and someone can refer themselves to describe a situation that requires resources, especially if you're not sure which offices or which people could be helpful. Saluki Cares has access to all of the resources and knows where to direct people. And that's a real easy submission process as far as just go to their website and just give a little information, and that student will be reached out to and supported.
Absolutely, Dr. Moros. Saluki Cares, as well as the disability support services here, that it's available for all our students. And I would mention TRIO. TRIO is also one of the spaces that I feel I can refer any of my students, and they will be treated just amazing and help and be tagging along their journey to fulfill their courses. So yes, we do have a lot of amazing spaces, and hopefully we can all extend those amazing spaces for everybody. My resource center is also a place for my undocumented and documented students. So that's another area that we have not discussed as far as the how they fit in our institutions, right? So I think that that's also important to address and to mention. So we have almost, we've got all our questions, which is amazing. We have a question in the chat, and I think that that's going to kind of move us on to our final stage, which is this question says, just as the history and effects of racism are pervasive across all fields of study, how will every single SIU academic department be held accountable to practicing and educating on anti-racism with their classrooms? Who will be responsible for this initiative? What curricula training and assessment tools will they be using? And so that's a question, right, that it's a big daunting question and big one. So with that said, we have our last question, and for our panel today, and this is for Dr. Mahoney. What is SIU doing for building an anti-racist system? And I think that question before goes along with this question. Thank you, Dr. Mahoney.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Castillo. And it's interesting, as we were getting prepared for this, I've thought about some of the past conversations of understanding we've had. And I remember several times I was asked, will SIU declare themselves an anti-racist organization? And I said, well, in many ways, I thought we had. When we did the first statement after the murder of George Floyd, I talked about addressing systemic racism at SIU. And then the board last December passed a statement that very much focuses on Southern Illinois University system being an anti-racist community. And all that entails. And so we have the board's clear support for that. We developed anti-racist task force is on each campus, as well as at the system level. And I think we have over 100 different recommendations working on, which are all at different stages in the process. We created Dr. Caldwell's job specifically with the term anti-racist in there. We also, within the strategic plan, as was mentioned earlier, one of our goals is that it is related to anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion. That being said, we haven't said it as clearly and as explicitly as the School of Medicine and our School of Law, who both have said that they will be anti-racist institutions. So let me be very clear about that. The SIU system will be an anti-racist university system, an anti-racist organization. That is our commitment. And I think that's important to say, and it's important to say what that means. It doesn't mean we're there. It doesn't mean we've addressed all of the racist policies, curriculum issues, many things we've talked about, structures that exist. It means we're committed to being on that anti-racism journey that Dr. Caldwell talked about, which means we're going to actively address those things and really look at the examples and where we see harm and injustice in our policies, in our structures, in our curriculum, and are committed to making changes to make each of those better. I will say, as I was listening to the conversation and Dr. Snipes talked about the doubt, which I get, I completely understand the doubt. And in fact, I remember when we were putting out, all of us as presidents, the statements after the murder of George Floyd, a lot of Black faculty said to me, well, let's see where they all are a year from now. And that many of them put out statements and not much happened after that. And honestly, I've seen that at other institutions. I think by making such a public commitment, we are saying it was not just a one-time statement, that this is, again, committing to that journey. And that's also committing to me and the system being accountable. And so you talked about the accountability, that we're now going to be accountable for something I've said publicly. So people will hold this up. We may at times fall short, but falling short at times does not mean we should not do everything we can to address problems and try to solve them at every opportunity we have. So it is a very public commitment, and I think that's important to do. And I don't think any other university system in the country has made that public commitment yet. I hope others do, but I think that that's important to make a public commitment. For those who may question why this is necessary, and I thought, Dr. Caldwell's statement about past harms is something I hear that a lot. So why am I responsible for past harms? And my response will be a couple things. One is that you have to recognize, and anybody who studies history and current issues, which is the class I teach is on history and current issues, you have to recognize that past harms have current impacts and current harms. So things that happened in the 1860s or the 1960s, yeah, I'm not responsible for those, but they have had an impact today, and I am responsible for that. I am responsible for the current harms. I am responsible for the future harms. And if I do nothing to address the current and future harms, then I have fallen short in my role, and I think we all have. And for those who sometimes question whether there are those current harms or whether we are in a situation where we need to do something, one of my areas of research focuses on equity. And one of the things I often look at is the data. If you look at the data, any data in our society, you will see inequity. And particularly if you look at universities, you look at the makeup of people who are in my positions, you will see inequity. If you look at the people who are in faculty positions, you'll see inequity. If you look at the performance of students and the percentage of students we have from different races, you'll see inequity. The data makes it very clear that we are not at this point equitable, and our commitment is to doing what we can to create greater equity. I am certainly fully aware that this is a conversation that sometimes makes people uncomfortable. As somebody who has, again, been reading about this, thinking about this from the time I was young, at times I feel uncomfortable about things that have happened, things that may have happened with my family, things I may have done myself. But I think the best way to deal with discomfort is to take action. And that's what we were talking about today, is anti-racism is really about taking action and being active. And I think Dr. Snipes said it well, and we need lots of people taking action. It can't be just me making one statement or Dr. Caldwell and I alone solving all of the problems. We really need action and activity from everybody. And so that's one of the things that we're asking you for today is to be part of that commitment to being an anti-racist organization and to take the action that you can. And I think the panelists did a fantastic job of outlining some of the actions you can take, both big and small. So I do want to thank the panel. Again, I learn something every time we have one of these conversations, and I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom, your understanding of these issues that often goes beyond my own. And so I deeply appreciate that. I also want to encourage everybody to attend SIUE's Diversity Day tomorrow. So I will be there. I hope you will be there as well. There's lots of great learning opportunities tomorrow as well. And that's, again, one of those action steps that you can take. So again, thank you to the panel. Thank you for everybody who attended today, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thank you.